Dr. Alana Jameson, a respected black physician, boards a flight expecting a peaceful journey, only to encounter unexpected prejudice when a fellow passenger demands she be moved to economy class. Tensions rise as Alana faces the painful reality of discrimination, but everything changes when that same passenger's young son suddenly experiences a life-threatening medical emergency. Alana becomes the only person who can save him, forcing her to decide whether to set aside the injustice and step in to help. Watch the full story to see how one moment of prejudice transforms into a life-changing experience for everyone involved. Before we dive into this gripping tale of courage, compassion, and resilience, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this powerful story, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring content. The Seattle evening sky stretched wide and deep, painted in purples and burnt oranges, as Dr. Alana Jameson stepped out of the Grand Conference Center. The Global Emergency Medicine Summit, a prestigious event that had gathered medical professionals from all over the world, was finally over. The atmosphere inside had been thick with networking and formalities for 3 long days, and Alana's mind hummed with the intensity of it all. She pulled her small carry-on suitcase behind her, the conference badge still hanging around her neck with the words, Dr. Alana Jameson, Emergency Physician, glinting in the fading light. Tonight, though, she was relieved to leave that title behind, if only for a few hours. The summit had been an immense professional achievement for Alana, but it had also been emotionally taxing. In her field, she was one of the very few black women who had earned such high recognition. Yet with each stride she took, Alana could feel the weight that came with being not just accomplished, but also watched and sometimes doubted. The conference was a stage where she had to prove her abilities over and over, where she felt the silent scrutiny of a field still largely dominated by white men. After years of navigating a career path that was both her calling and her challenge, Alana had become adept at keeping her calm, polished demeanor even when the weight of judgment bore down on her. But tonight, she was ready for a little peace. She hailed a cab and slid into the back seat, sighing as the driver loaded her suitcase. She requested the route to SeaTac Airport, relaxing against the leather as the cab pulled away. As soft jazz music drifted from the radio, Alana allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. Outside, the cityscape of Seattle blurred past, a collage of towering skyscrapers, dimly lit shops, and streets alive with people going about their night. Alana loved her work, and the profound satisfaction it brought her. But it had required tremendous endurance, more so, she often thought, than her colleagues. Behind every achievement, she had learned to shield herself from the subtle dismissals, the raised eyebrows, and the endless questions that seemed to come her way more often than her peers. Sometimes, it felt as if every breakthrough required twice the effort, and the weight of that truth left her weary. The cab ride offered a small reprieve as she let her thoughts wander over the events of the week. She remembered her keynote speech on innovative emergency procedures, which had gone better than she'd hoped. Yet, the nervousness from the questions about diversity and inclusion lingered with her. Topics that were close to her heart, yet were often met with perfunctory nods and strained smiles from her peers. While they acknowledged the need for inclusivity, Alana sensed the resistance beneath their courteous expressions, as if the conversation was still something separate from their reality. She peered out the window, watching the glimmer of lights as the cab wound through the city. Although the world outside was buzzing with life, Alana felt a quiet separation from it. Floating somewhere between the professional triumphs she'd earned and the small but persistent loneliness she couldn't quite shake. Moments like this allowed her to process everything, to understand that her journey, while rewarding, often placed her on the outskirts of belonging. Soon, the airport loomed into view, and Alana felt a pang of relief. The driver pulled up to the curb, and after she paid the fare, she stepped into the terminal's bright chaos. Families hurried by, announcements echoed over the intercom, and the sounds of suitcases rolling over tile floors created a steady hum. Despite the frenzy, Alana felt comforted by the familiarity of the scene. It was a space she could blend into, a neutral zone where she was just another traveler with a ticket home. Approaching the first-class check-in counter, Alana was greeted by a young airline attendant who looked at her with a practiced smile. The woman's gaze lingered on Alana's badge, and her polite smile widened slightly. "Good evening, Dr. Jameson. Heading back home to Atlanta?" she asked. "Yes, back to Atlanta," Alana replied, returning the smile. With efficiency, the attendant scanned Alana's documents, her head tilting with a slightly curious expression. "Long trip?" she inquired sympathetically. Alana nodded, feeling the heaviness on her shoulders. "It's been eventful," she replied with a hint of exhaustion. The woman gave her a knowing nod. "Well, first class should give you a little rest. Safe travels, Dr. Jameson." "Thank you," Alana replied, taking her boarding pass and heading toward the security line for first-class passengers. As she waited in line, she let her mind drift once more. She loved airports for their in-between quality, as spaces where people came and went, often too preoccupied to worry about anyone else. Here she could find a bit of respite, a brief chance to be anonymous, where her title and achievements faded into the background. After a smooth pass through security, Alana strolled through the spacious concourse, taking in the shops and food outlets. She wasn't hungry, but the routine of walking through the terminal felt grounding after the intense focus of the conference. She caught a brief reflection of herself in the glass of a newsstand, pausing just for a moment. Her dark skin shone under the fluorescent lights, her tightly coiled hair framing her face neatly. She looked confident and composed, a reflection of the career she had fought hard to build. But beneath the polished exterior, Alana couldn't deny the lingering fatigue in her eyes, the weariness that came from more than just a busy work week. She eventually reached her gate, finding an open seat near the window. As she sank down, Alana glanced at her phone, half-heartedly checking emails from the hospital back in Atlanta. There were a few updates, shift schedules, and patient notes waiting for her, but tonight she decided to ignore them. This flight was supposed to be a break, a moment to reset before diving back into the life she loved but often felt drained by. When the boarding announcement finally came, Alana stood up, boarding passes in hand, and moved toward the gate. The attendant scanned her ticket with a smile, and soon she was stepping onto the jet bridge, her thoughts drifting away from the world outside as she entered the quiet, dimly lit first-class cabin. The plush leather seats and soft lighting created an atmosphere of comfort and calm, a stark contrast to the bustling terminal she had left behind. A flight attendant greeted her warmly as she settled into her seat, offering to stow her carry-on above. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Jameson. If you need anything, just let us know," the attendant said with a reassuring smile. Alana returned the smile, her voice quiet. "Thank you. I think I just need some quiet." As she adjusted her seat's recline and set her noise-canceling headphones around her neck, Alana allowed herself to exhale fully for the first time that evening. The hum of the engines, the few murmured conversations from other first-class passengers, and the tranquil cabin lighting all lulled her into a sense of peace. She closed her eyes, letting the rest of the world fade away, ready to drift off and savor the serenity she'd been longing for. Alana had just started to unwind, her body sinking comfortably into the wide first-class seat, when a small commotion near the front of the cabin pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see a young boy, no older than 7, struggling with his seatbelt. His face twisted in concentration as he fumbled with the buckle. Standing beside him, a tall, slim woman, likely his mother, was preoccupied with arranging their belongings in the overhead bin. Her brow was furrowed, lips pressed tightly together, clearly more annoyed than helpful. With a soft sigh and a warm smile, Alana leaned forward, extending a hand toward the boy. "Here, let me help you with that," she offered gently, fastening his seatbelt with practiced ease. The boy looked up at her, eyes wide with gratitude and relief. "Thanks," he said brightly, his brief frustration replaced by a grin that was as infectious as it was innocent. Alana couldn't help but smile back, her fatigue briefly forgotten, but as she returned to her seat, she caught the woman's gaze, sharp and cold. There was no thank you, no polite smile of appreciation. Instead, the woman's expression was one of subtle contempt, her gaze dropping to Alana's hands before flicking dismissively away. A familiar chill crept down Alana's spine. She had seen that look before, countless times, in countless forms. It was a look that required no words, yet carried the weight of assumptions and quiet judgments. Taking a steady breath, Alana turned back to her seat, doing her best to shake off the uneasy feeling that lingered. Maybe the woman was just exhausted from traveling with a young child, she reasoned, brushing it off. But despite her best efforts, the moment had left a shadow over the peace she had hoped to find on this flight. She tried to focus on the rhythmic hum of the engines, the muffled voices of the passengers settling into their seats, and the familiar comfort of her headphones resting around her neck. Yet the interaction lingered in her mind. Alana had long ago learned the delicate art of letting these moments slide past, like water over stones. She knew the subtle ways people communicated doubt or disdain when they assumed she didn't belong, whether it was on hospital boards, at conferences, or here in the first-class cabin. She took another steadying breath, forcing herself to relax and lean into the headrest. This was supposed to be her moment of rest. She had earned her place here, and she wouldn't let anyone take away her right to enjoy it. Passengers continued to file into the cabin, but Alana barely noticed, focusing instead on the soft lighting and the quiet murmur of voices around her. She closed her eyes, thinking only of the peace she had been craving for days. But just as she started to let go of the unease, the voice of the boy's mother, a sharp, irritated whisper, cut through her thoughts. "I'm not sitting next to her." Alana's eyes snapped open. For a moment, she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. The voice was low, as if the woman were trying to keep her frustration in check, but the bitterness in her words was unmistakable. Alana sat up, her shoulders tense, straining to hear more without drawing attention to herself. She cast a glance over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of the woman's face. It was the boy's mother, her gaze fixed firmly on the flight attendant with a tight-lipped expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Is there a problem with your seat?" the flight attendant asked, her tone polite but clearly puzzled. "Yes, there is," the woman replied, her voice louder now, tinged with irritation. "I don't want to sit next to her." The venom in her voice felt like a slap, and Alana felt her stomach twist with a mixture of shock and hurt. It wasn't just the words, it was the force behind them, the absolute certainty that her demand was justified. In that instant, Alana knew without a doubt what the woman meant. This wasn't about seating arrangements, legroom, or even personal space. This was about her, Alana, and the color of her skin. A familiar sense of nausea crept over her, one she hadn't felt in a while. Her fingers tightened around the armrests, and she forced herself to stay calm. She had been here before, in one way or another. She had learned to steel herself against the subtle slights and not-so-subtle rejections, to hold her head high in the face of prejudice. But somehow, in this quiet, dim cabin where she had hoped to find a moment of solace, the sting felt sharper, cutting right through the calm she had tried so hard to create. The flight attendant, visibly flustered, glanced toward Alana, her expression one of discomfort and apology. Alana knew what was coming before the attendant even spoke. "Dr. Jameson, I am so sorry," the attendant began softly, her voice hesitant and clearly embarrassed. "Would you mind? Would it be possible for you to?" The words were unspoken but unmistakable. Alana had heard them too many times to be surprised. Could she be the one to move? Could she sacrifice her comfort, her dignity, just to make someone else feel more comfortable in their prejudice? For a split second, Alana wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to stand her ground, to make it clear that she had earned her place here just as much as anyone else. She had paid for her seat, worked for her title, and fought for every inch of respect in her profession. But as she glanced back at the attendant, who looked at her with pleading eyes, Alana felt the weight of exhaustion settle over her. She was tired of fighting, tired of being asked to rise above, to be the one to bend, to absorb the impact so others wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. It wasn't fair, but fairness wasn't something she expected from this world. With a steadying breath, Alana slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and rose, collecting her things with a deliberate calm that belied the storm brewing inside her. The woman, the same woman who had looked at her with such disdain, watched with smug satisfaction, her arms crossed as if she had won some petty victory. Alana avoided her gaze, instead focusing on the flight attendant, who murmured a quiet, deeply apologetic, "Thank you, Dr. Jameson." She was shown to an economy seat further back in the plane. The contrast was stark. The cramped seating, the lack of space, the armrests that dug into her sides. But it wasn't the physical discomfort that hurt. It was the weight of the humiliation, the reminder that to some people, she would never belong, no matter how much she achieved. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Alana looked out the window, watching the lights of the city fade into the distance. Her reflection stared back at her, strong and poised, yet undeniably hurt. She reminded herself to breathe, to let go of the resentment, to focus on the work waiting for her back in Atlanta. But as the plane lifted into the sky, she knew it wasn't that easy. The ache lingered, a subtle but persistent reminder of the reality she had learned to navigate long ago. Bookmark. Alana shifted in her economy seat, trying to find a bit of comfort, though the cramped space felt worlds away from the first-class seat she'd paid for. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to let go of the frustration and disappointment lingering from the earlier exchange. She was used to being underestimated, sidelined, and silently judged. She had faced similar situations from the time she was a young girl, growing up in the South, where she had been surrounded by people who doubted her abilities without knowing a single thing about her. Her phone buzzed with a few work emails she'd ignored earlier. Normally, she would dive into them, answering urgent questions, giving her input on cases, and setting up her next shift. But tonight, she was too drained to care. She tucked her phone away, closed her eyes, and let the hum of the engines lull her into a semblance of peace. Just as she began to drift off, a piercing sound cut through the cabin, jarring her out of her thoughts. It was the panicked cry of a child, high-pitched, sharp, and filled with terror. Alana's instincts kicked in immediately, and she sat up, heart pounding as she scanned the cabin for the source. Her eyes settled on a small figure at the front of the plane. The young boy she had helped with his seatbelt earlier, Cody. His hands were clutching his throat, his face red and twisted in panic as he gasped for air. Alana recognized the signs immediately. Cody was having an asthma attack. Without thinking, she unbuckled her seatbelt and moved quickly up the aisle. The flight attendants were already hovering nearby, their faces a mix of confusion and worry, clearly unsure of what to do. Cody's mother, the same woman who had demanded that Alana be moved, was now frantically trying to soothe her son. Her hands fluttered helplessly around him as she pleaded with him to breathe, but it was clear he couldn't. Alana moved beside them, placing a gentle hand on Cody's back. "I'm a doctor," she said firmly, addressing both the flight attendants and Cody's mother. "He's having an asthma attack. Does he have an inhaler?" The woman, Cody's mother, who Alana now remembered as Lindsay, looked up at her, her face a mixture of shock and terror. For a moment, she seemed unable to process what Alana was saying, her eyes wide and unfocused. Finally, she shook her head frantically, her voice trembling. No. He left it in the car. I didn't think he'd need it." Alana's heart sank. An asthma attack at 30,000 feet without an inhaler was dangerous. They needed to get Cody's breathing under control quickly. She looked at Lindsay, her tone calm but commanding. "We'll need to keep him as calm as possible. If he panics, his breathing will only get worse. Can you help me with that?" Lindsay nodded, her face pale, her eyes filling with tears as she gripped her son's hand. "Cody, baby, it's okay. You're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Alana could hear the guilt in Lindsay's voice, the edge of desperation as she watched her son struggle. Turning to the flight attendant nearby, Alana spoke in a calm, authoritative tone. "I need oxygen right now. Please bring an oxygen mask and any medical supplies you have on board." The flight attendant nodded and rushed off to retrieve the supplies. Alana kept her attention on Cody, placing a hand on his shoulder as she spoke softly. "Cody, listen to me. I'm going to help you breathe, but I need you to stay calm, okay? Take a deep breath, nice and slow, like this." She demonstrated, taking a slow, deep breath and releasing it in a steady stream. Cody looked at her, his wide, frightened eyes locking onto hers. He tried to mimic her, his breath shallow and labored, but Alana could see the trust in his eyes, the belief that she could help him, even in his panic. Moments later, the flight attendant returned with the oxygen tank. Alana wasted no time attaching the mask over Cody's nose and mouth, adjusting the flow to help ease his breathing. She kept her hand steady on his shoulder, her voice soft and soothing. Cody's breathing began to slow, though it was still strained, each shallow breath a fight for air. Lindsay knelt beside her son, her face etched with worry and guilt. She leaned forward, whispering, "You're going to be fine, Cody. Dr. Jameson is helping you." Her voice, once laced with resentment, now held a quiet reverence and gratitude that hadn't been there before. She had no choice now but to rely on Alana, the very person she had pushed away hours before. But Alana wasn't focused on that. Right now, the only thing that mattered was keeping Cody safe. She stayed close, monitoring his breathing and watching for any signs of further distress. With each breath he took, the tension in the cabin grew. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, their earlier indifference replaced with respect. But Alana blocked them out, her focus entirely on Cody. Finally, after several tense minutes, his breathing began to even out. Alana kept the oxygen mask in place, guiding him through each slow breath. "Just a little longer, Cody," she murmured, her tone encouraging. Cody's small fingers clutched at his mother's hand, his breathing growing less labored as the oxygen began to take effect. The panic had left his eyes, though his face was still pale and his breathing shallow. As the tension eased, Lindsay looked up at Alana, her face a mask of remorse and gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything." Alana didn't respond immediately. She kept her focus on Cody, adjusting the oxygen mask as he continued to breathe more steadily. Lindsay's words hung in the air between them, unspoken, yet deeply felt. There was a shift between them, a silent recognition of the gravity of the moment and the hurtful judgment that had come before it. Lindsay's voice cracked as she spoke again. "I judged you. I treated you terribly. I don't know what I was thinking. I was wrong." Alana met her gaze, her expression calm and unreadable. "Let's focus on Cody for now," she replied softly. "We can deal with the rest later." Lindsay nodded, wiping away a tear as she turned back to her son, her hand never leaving his. As Alana monitored Cody's condition, she could feel the weight of Lindsay's unspoken apology. It wasn't that she wanted an apology, she hadn't saved Cody for validation. But the shift in Lindsay's tone and the look in her eyes said more than words could. Around them, the cabin had gone silent, the tension replaced by a quiet awe as the other passengers watched Alana work. It didn't matter to her that they now saw her differently, that they no longer viewed her through the lens of preconceived notions. All that mattered was Cody, who was finally breathing normally, his life no longer in danger, and his mother, who had begun to understand the reality Alana lived with every day. Alana remained kneeling beside Cody, her focus never wavering as she monitored his breathing. Though the steady flow of oxygen had helped stabilize him, she knew better than to let her guard down. Without an inhaler, Cody was still vulnerable to another flare-up. Alana felt the boy's chest rise and fall under her hand, each breath now deeper and more even. A wave of relief washed over her, though she kept her face calm, ready to respond to any signs of distress. Lindsay stayed close by her son's side, gripping his hand as if she could hold him steady by sheer will. Alana noticed the shift in her expression, the tension in her face that went beyond the panic of a parent. It was as if Lindsay were seeing Alana for the first time, not as an outsider, but as the person who had just saved her child's life. Her earlier suspicion and disdain had melted away, replaced by gratitude and something much deeper, a painful awareness of her own mistakes. "I don't know how to thank you," Lindsay whispered, her voice barely above a tremble. I'm so sorry for what I did, for the way I treated you earlier. I don't even have an excuse. Her voice trailed off, breaking with emotion. Alana kept her attention on Cody, her tone gentle but resolute. "Right now, let's just keep Cody calm. We can talk about the rest later." Lindsay nodded, swallowing hard as she stroked her son's hair, her fingers trembling. The shift in her voice and her expression was unmistakable. Gone was the woman who had demanded that Alana be moved. In her place was a mother filled with guilt, desperately wanting to make things right. Alana could feel the weight of Lindsay's apology, the unspoken regret that lingered in her gaze. She wasn't looking for forgiveness, but for a way to express her gratitude and remorse. For Alana, these moments weren't new. She had heard apologies before, seen people realize their misjudgments once they were faced with a different reality. She hadn't gone into medicine to prove herself to others. She had done it because she loved helping people. Yet, the hurt from earlier still lingered, a reminder of the prejudice she had carried through her career. She took a slow breath, focusing on Cody, who was resting easier now, his face no longer twisted in panic. As the cabin settled into a tense silence, the flight attendant approached, her expression a mixture of worry and admiration. She knelt beside Alana, her voice low. "Is he going to be all right, Dr. Jameson?" Alana nodded, though her tone remained serious. "He's stable for now, but without his inhaler, there's a risk he could relapse. We need to keep him on oxygen and keep him calm. But if his condition worsens, we'll have to make an emergency landing." The flight attendant's face tightened, and she nodded quickly, stepping away to relay the information to the captain. Alana turned back to Cody, adjusting the oxygen mask slightly, her hand steady on his shoulder. The small hum of the engines was the only sound in the cabin, every passenger watching her with a mixture of worry and newfound respect. It was as if the air itself had shifted, the earlier tension replaced by silent recognition of Alana's skill, her calm authority and her presence. For the first time, Lindsay looked up from her son, her tear-filled eyes meeting Alana's. "I can't believe I'm ashamed of how I treated you," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I didn't see who you were, I just saw what I thought I knew." Her words came out choked, filled with guilt and remorse that was as raw as it was genuine. Alana met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "It's not something that can be fixed with an apology," she said gently. "But what matters now is that Cody is all right. That's what we need to focus on." Lindsay's eyes brimmed with tears, but she nodded, understanding that Alana wasn't here for her validation. She whispered, "Thank you, really. I mean it. I don't think I can ever repay you." Alana glanced at her, a faint softness in her expression. "Just take care of him. That's all that matters right now." The quiet reverence in the cabin continued as Cody's breathing began to stabilize further. Alana could sense the other passengers watching her, their earlier judgment dissolved in the light of what they had just witnessed. It wasn't the first time she had been in a situation where she had to set aside her own feelings to help others, even those who had wronged her. She had learned long ago that helping people wasn't about proving herself, but about staying true to who she was. The minutes stretched on, each one heavy with the tension of the unknown. Cody's breathing was steady now, but Alana stayed close, her hand on his shoulder, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Lindsay hadn't let go of her son's hand, her face etched with an intensity that went beyond simple gratitude. She looked at Alana with something closer to reverence, as if she understood, even in her regret, the depth of her own prejudice. Just as the cabin began to relax, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency on board, we will be making an emergency descent to Denver International Airport. Flight attendants, prepare for descent." A ripple of murmurs swept through the cabin, and Alana felt a small measure of relief. The rapid descent would allow Cody to receive the medical attention he needed. Though she had managed to stabilize him, she knew how unpredictable asthma attacks could be, especially at high altitudes and without his inhaler. The plane began to descend, and Alana braced herself as the pressure in the cabin shifted. The descent was fast, jarring, and uncomfortable, but necessary. Beside her, Lindsay held on to Cody tightly, her expression torn between fear and hope. Alana's gaze remained steady, her hand on Cody's shoulder as she monitored his breathing. A few seats away, Alana caught sight of one of the businessmen who had made a snide comment earlier, now looking at her with wide, uncertain eyes. She knew he, like many others on the plane, had seen her in a different light earlier in the evening. Now, his face was filled with something closer to respect, even awe. Alana looked away, dismissing the weight of his gaze. Respect from people like him was neither her goal nor her concern. She had one focus now, and that was Cody. Finally, the wheels of the plane touched down with a thud, and Alana felt a surge of relief as the plane slowed to a halt on the runway. The flight attendants moved quickly to open the cabin door, and within moments, a team of paramedics boarded the plane, moving swiftly toward Cody's seat. Alana stepped back, allowing them to take over, though she remained close, giving them a quick summary of the situation. "He's stable for now, but he's had a severe asthma attack at altitude, and we've only been using oxygen to manage it. He needs immediate treatment," Alana explained, her tone calm but urgent. The paramedics nodded, moving efficiently as they placed Cody on a stretcher. Lindsay followed close behind, her eyes never leaving her son. As they prepared to wheel Cody toward the exit, Lindsay looked back at Alana, her face etched with gratitude and remorse. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't thank you enough." Alana offered a small nod, her voice steady. "Just take care of him. That's all that matters." The cabin remained silent as Lindsay and Cody were led out, the tension finally breaking as the other passengers began to stir. Alana stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the night settle over her. She had done her job. She had saved a life. But the emotions from the night, the quiet victories and the unspoken conflicts, left her feeling both weary and quietly triumphant. As the paramedics wheeled Cody and his mother off the plane, Alana felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The steady hum of the engines filled the quiet cabin, and she let out a slow breath, trying to release the tension that had coiled within her over the last hour. Around her, the other passengers began to shift, their low murmurs filling the silence as they processed the event that had unfolded before them. Alana was no stranger to handling crises. In her work as an emergency physician, she'd faced life-or-death situations every day. But the past few hours hadn't just tested her medical skills. They had tested her patience, her resilience, and her ability to rise above the hurt that others had inflicted upon her. Tonight's battle hadn't only been with an asthma attack. It had been with the quiet, stinging prejudice that Cody's mother, Lindsay, had shown. And while Alana had saved Cody's life without hesitation, the emotional toll of the night lingered. As she sank back into her seat, Emma, the flight attendant who had assisted her with Cody, approached quietly, her expression filled with both gratitude and sympathy. She knelt beside Alana's seat, lowering her voice so as not to disturb the other passengers. "Dr. Jameson, I just wanted to thank you. I don't know what would have done without you. You handled everything so gracefully, even after what happened earlier with—" She trailed off, glancing back toward where Lindsay and Cody had been seated. Alana offered a tired smile, though her eyes held a hint of sadness. "Thank you, Emma. I'm just relieved that Cody is all right." Emma hesitated, looking down before speaking again. "I just want you to know, I'm sorry you were treated that way. It was unfair, and you didn't deserve it." Her voice was sincere, tinged with the kind of empathy that only comes when witnessing injustice firsthand. Alana nodded, appreciating Emma's words, though she had heard similar apologies before. "It happens more often than you'd think," she replied quietly, her voice touched with a weariness that came from years of carrying these moments with her. "But that doesn't make it any easier." Emma's face tightened, a flicker of discomfort passing over her features. "For what it's worth, you have my respect. I'll be filing a report to make sure the airline is aware of everything you did for Cody and what you had to go through." Alana nodded, appreciating Emma's kindness, though she knew a report could only go so far. The prejudice she faced wasn't something an incident report could fix. It was a much deeper issue, woven into the assumptions and biases that people like Lindsay carried without even realizing it. Alana had faced this prejudice her entire life. She knew it was a battle that couldn't be won in a single night or with a single act of kindness. "Thank you, Emma," Alana said, her voice soft. "I appreciate that." Emma offered her a brief, encouraging smile before standing and moving on to check on the other passengers. Alana watched her go, then leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment. The cabin had returned to its usual quiet hum, but now the silence held a different weight, a newfound respect that hadn't been there before. The passengers around her who had once cast glances of indifference or judgment were now silent, their expressions uncertain, perhaps even regretful. Alana's gaze drifted to a group of businessmen seated a few rows ahead, the same men who had made a snide remark when she was asked to move to economy. Now, Their postures were stiff, their gazes averted, as if unsure how to reconcile the woman they had once dismissed with the doctor who had saved a young boy's life. Though Alana could feel their discomfort, she didn't care for their validation. Respect that was given out of guilt or obligation wasn't something she valued. Her work as a doctor had never been about proving herself to others. It had always been about helping people, even if those people had judged her unfairly. The plane had been cleared to resume its journey to Atlanta, and after a delay on the tarmac, it began its ascent once more. Alana turned her head toward the window, watching the lights of Denver shrink beneath them, the dark night sky stretching out as far as she could see. She allowed her mind to drift, hoping to find some peace in the familiar rumble of the engines. But as she sat there, the events of the night continued to replay in her mind. No matter how often she faced moments like this, they always left an ache in her chest. She had risen above it tonight, as she always did, but part of her couldn't shake the bitterness that lingered. Why did it always fall on her to take the high road, to be the one to remain calm and composed in the face of hostility? As she grappled with these thoughts, the flight attendant passed by, offering refreshments. Alana declined, her appetite lost amid the frustration that gnawed at her. She was about to close her eyes and settle back when she heard a familiar voice. "Dr. Jameson?" She looked up, surprised to see Lindsay standing in the aisle beside her. The woman's face was tear-streaked, her hands clenched together tightly, her expression a mix of regret and nervousness. Can I sit with you for a moment?" Alana hesitated, her emotions still too raw to engage in conversation. But when she saw the sincerity in Lindsay's eyes, she nodded slowly, gesturing to the seat beside her. Lindsay lowered herself into the seat, her movements tentative, as though she were intruding on a space she didn't deserve to occupy. She opened her mouth to speak but faltered, her gaze dropping to her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I don't even know where to start," she murmured. "I treated you horribly, and now, after everything you did for Cody, I just don't know how to make it right." Alana regarded her carefully, her expression calm yet guarded. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice measured but firm. "Why did you assume I didn't belong?" Lindsay's face crumpled, and she brought a trembling hand to her mouth. "I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I don't know why I just didn't question it. I grew up in a place where people like me, well, we didn't know people like you." Her voice broke, a painful honesty in her words. I thought you'd judge me. I saw you and assumed you were looking down on me, and I don't even know why I thought that." Alana felt a familiar pang of sadness as she listened. She had heard this story before, seen people wrestle with the shame that came from realizing their own prejudices. But this realization, as genuine as it might be, didn't erase the hurt or make things right. "You weren't born with those ideas," Alana said gently but firmly. "But you can choose to question them, to see people for who they really are." Lindsay's eyes filled with fresh tears and she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I swear I'll do better. For Cody's sake and for mine." Alana studied her for a moment, her expression softening. "I don't need your apology, Lindsay. What I need is for you to learn from this. Make sure Cody grows up seeing people for who they are, not what they look like." Lindsay nodded quickly, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I will." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Lindsay's words hanging between them. Finally, Lindsay rose, offering one last tearful "thank you," before returning to her seat. As Alana watched her go, a small part of her felt a sliver of hope, a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, Lindsay would take this moment to heart. After Lindsay returned to her seat, Alana sat quietly, her mind turning over their conversation. Lindsay's words lingered, and though Alana recognized the sincerity of her apology, she knew that true change would take much more than a single moment of clarity. She had seen similar transformations before, seen people awaken to their own biases and prejudices, but the journey from apology to real change was long and difficult, and many never made it that far. Outside the window, the night sky stretched endlessly, dotted with distant stars. Alana gazed out, the familiar vastness reminding her of the challenges she had overcome. Growing up as a black girl in the South, she had faced prejudice from an early age. Teachers, neighbors, and even classmates had made assumptions about her, seeing her potential only through the limiting lens of their biases. But her parents had taught her to stand tall, to use each challenge as a stepping stone. Strength isn't about fighting every battle, her mother used to say. It's about choosing which ones matter and letting go of the rest. Alana had taken that lesson with her through every step of her journey, from high school to medical school, and into her career as a physician. Each time someone doubted her capabilities, she reminded herself of her own worth. She had put in the hours, earned her place, and built her reputation not just by rising above others' expectations, but by exceeding them. And tonight she had done what she always did, held herself to the highest standard, showing compassion even when others showed her disdain. But even as she told herself that this was simply another hurdle, she couldn't deny the bitterness that lingered. Why should she always have to rise above? Why was it her responsibility to be the bigger person? To teach others through patience rather than holding them accountable for their own actions? As these thoughts swirled, the plane settled into a calm quiet, the passengers now subdued. Many of them had watched the scene with Lindsay unfold, and though Alana could feel their stolen glances and hear their quiet whispers, she chose to ignore them. She had learned long ago that she couldn't control others' perceptions. All she could control was how she responded. Tonight, she had chosen to respond with grace for herself and for the values she held dear. A few rows ahead, she noticed one of the businessmen from earlier, the one who had muttered a snide remark about her being out of place in first class, now shifting uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes flicked toward her, then quickly away, as though he were embarrassed to be seen acknowledging her. Alana felt a flicker of satisfaction that he was finally seeing her for who she was. But respect that came only after witnessing her skills and resilience wasn't the kind of respect she valued. It was conditional, shallow, born from guilt rather than genuine understanding. As the plane reached its cruising altitude and the attendants began offering refreshments, Alana declined, her thoughts too tangled for her to consider eating. She closed her eyes, hoping the familiar hum of the engines would soothe her into a moment of rest. Yet her mind refused to settle, still caught on the events of the night. Eventually, she let herself lean back, taking a few steadying breaths. She thought of Cody, of the way he had looked up at her with pure, unfiltered trust. For children like Cody who hadn't yet been burdened with the biases of the world, people were simply people, judged by their actions rather than their appearance. If only Lindsay had been able to see the world through her son's eyes from the beginning. Perhaps that innocence was something Lindsay could nurture and protect, giving Cody a chance to grow up without the same prejudices that had taken hold in her. As she rested, Emma, the flight attendant who had been so supportive, quietly approached Alana's seat. She knelt beside her, speaking in a low voice. "Dr. Jameson, I just wanted to check on you. After everything." Her expression held genuine concern, a kindness that made Alana's guarded expression soften. Alana opened her eyes, offering Emma a faint smile. "Thank you, Emma. I appreciate it. I'm all right. Just a lot to think about." Emma nodded, her expression filled with understanding. "Well, for what it's worth, you handled it all with more patience than most people would. I'll be filing a report to make sure everything that happened tonight is documented. I just wish—" She hesitated, glancing away, her tone thoughtful. "I just wish things were different. You shouldn't have to deal with this." Alana gave a small nod. "Thank you, Emma. I wish things were different too, but I appreciate your support. It means a lot." Emma squeezed Alana's hand lightly, her face reflecting a mixture of sadness and admiration. "If there's anything I can do to make you more comfortable for the rest of the flight, just let me know." Alana shook her head, smiling. "I think I just need a little peace right now. But thank you." Emma nodded, standing up and moving on to assist the other passengers. Alana watched her go, grateful for her kindness. It was a reminder that, despite the hurtful actions of some, there were still people who chose to see beyond superficial differences, who chose empathy over judgment. As the flight continued toward Atlanta, Alana allowed herself to close her eyes again, letting the rhythmic hum of the engines ease her mind. The night's events had tested her resilience, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced prejudice tonight, yes, but she had also seen a glimpse of hope in Lindsay's apology. Real change was rare and slow, but perhaps moments like these would plant seeds, leading people like Lindsay towards self-reflection and growth. With her eyes still closed, Alana's mind drifted back to her childhood, to the lessons her parents had instilled in her. Her mother had always told her that her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's opinions, that she could only control her own actions and let the rest fall into place. And her father had taught her to keep her head high, no matter the obstacles, reminding her that her journey was hers alone. Those teachings had been the foundation upon which she had built her life, the pillars that held her steady, even when the world seemed determined to knock her down. Tonight had been just one more reminder of that truth. Alana was who she was because she refused to be defined by others. She had faced down prejudice not out of necessity, but out of a fierce commitment to her own dignity and compassion. And though the pain of Lindsay's actions would linger, Alana knew she would continue to rise above, just as she always had. As the plane sped through the night sky toward Atlanta, Alana allowed herself a moment of stillness. She was tired, yes, but she was also stronger for having endured the night's events. There would be more battles ahead, more moments of misunderstanding and prejudice, but she would face them with the same grace and resolve that had carried her through so many before. She could rest, knowing that she had done her best, not just as a doctor, but as a person who held herself to a higher standard, no matter what others thought. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Alana looked out the window, watching the glittering city lights grow brighter as they approached. The quiet murmur of passengers preparing for landing filled the cabin, yet Alana stayed still, letting the familiar hum of the engines wash over her, soothing the lingering ache from the events of the night. She had come through another challenge, one that had tested her more than most, but she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had held firm to her values, proving, if only to herself, that her strength went far beyond her medical skills. As the plane touched down and rolled to a slow stop, Alana prepared to gather her belongings, hoping to leave the weight of the night behind her. A few passengers nodded at her respectfully as they passed by, some even murmuring small words of thanks. Though she hadn't sought their acknowledgement, their gratitude reminded her that her actions had mattered, that her presence had made a difference beyond just the medical care she had provided to Cody. When the cabin had mostly cleared, Alana stood, reaching up to retrieve her carry-on bag from the overhead compartment. Her movements were steady, despite the exhaustion she felt. The night had been long and challenging, but she had faced every moment with grace, something she would carry with her beyond this flight. As she began to walk down the aisle toward the exit, she noticed the businessmen from earlier, now avoiding her gaze as she passed. Their snide remarks from before echoed faintly in her mind, but she dismissed them with a quiet resilience. Tonight had proven that, in the end, actions spoke louder than preconceived notions. They had seen her in a new light, though whether it would change their views in the long term was beyond her control. Just as Alana neared the front of the cabin, Emma, the flight attendant who had been so supportive throughout the journey, approached her once more. Her face was filled with a mixture of admiration and empathy, and she reached out to touch Alana's arm gently. "Dr. Jameson," Emma said softly, her voice warm. "Thank you again for everything you did tonight, for Cody, and for everyone who witnessed it. I don't think any of us will forget it anytime soon." Alana offered a small, grateful smile, nodding in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Emma. I appreciate your kindness and support. It made a difference." Emma's expression softened further, and she leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know tonight must have been difficult for you, but I hope you know you've made an impact. Even those who didn't understand at first, I think they're beginning to see things differently. And that's thanks to you." Alana nodded, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "Thank you, Emma. Change is slow, but moments like this make it feel a little more possible." Emma gave her arm a gentle squeeze before letting go. "If there's anything I can do, please let me know. And safe travels, Dr. Jameson." "Thank you," Alana replied, her voice warm with genuine gratitude. She made her way off the plane, stepping into the bustling terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The familiar hum of the airport felt grounding, bringing her back to the world she knew, away from the scrutiny and challenges of the flight. As she walked through the terminal toward the baggage claim, she allowed herself a moment to exhale fully, releasing the emotional tension that had built up throughout the journey. The chaos of the airport, with families reuniting, travelers hurrying to their next destination, and the endless announcements over the loudspeakers, felt like a comforting blur. In the midst of it, Alana felt a renewed sense of peace. She had made it through another battle, one that had tested not just her skills as a doctor, but her patience and strength as a person. When she reached the baggage claim area, her phone buzzed with a new message. Alana glanced down at the screen, recognizing the number immediately. It was from Lindsay, Cody's mother. She hesitated, feeling a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty, before opening the message. "Dr. Jameson, I just wanted to thank you again for what you did for Cody. He's stable now, and the doctors say he'll be all right. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I've thought about everything we talked about, and I'm committed to changing, for Cody's sake and for myself. Thank you again, and I hope one day I can show you I've learned from this." Alana read the message twice, letting Lindsay's words sink in. She could sense the sincerity in Lindsay's words, the genuine remorse that had surfaced through their shared ordeal. She knew that the path to real change was a long one, and that it wouldn't happen overnight. But the message was a start, a small step toward the kind of transformation that Alana hoped could become a reality for more people. For now, she decided to leave the message unanswered. Forgiveness, she knew, was a process, and it was something she would need time to consider. Lindsay's journey was her own, and while Alana's actions might have sparked her self-reflection, it was up to Lindsay to follow through. After retrieving her luggage, Alana stepped out into the cool night air, breathing deeply as she took in the familiar skyline of Atlanta. The city lights gleamed in the distance, each one a reminder of the life she had built here, a life defined not by others' judgments but by her own dedication and strength. As she climbed into the taxi, she settled back in the seat, feeling the exhaustion of the night finally catch up with her. Yet, as they drove through the city, passing by neighborhoods and landmarks she had come to love, Alana felt a sense of pride swell within her. She had stayed true to herself, navigating each moment with integrity, even when others had failed to do the same. She was reminded of her own resilience, of the quiet power that came from remaining steadfast in the face of adversity. As the taxi approached her house, Alana glanced at her phone once more, this time seeing a message from her longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Keisha Reynolds. Keisha had been her confidant and support system since their early residency days, and no one understood the challenges Alana faced quite like she did. "Hey, just finished my shift. How was the flight back?" Keisha's message read. Alana smiled, already imagining how she would recount the events of the night. It would feel good to talk to someone who understood her, someone who would listen without judgment, and who knew the struggle she had just endured. With a small smile, she typed a quick reply. "Long story. I'll fill you in tomorrow." She set her phone down, knowing that her conversation with Keisha would be a chance to process everything that had happened. Tonight had been a test of her patience and strength, but Alana had faced it with grace, and she knew she would continue to rise above, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As she stepped out of the taxi and unlocked her front door, Alana felt a sense of relief wash over her. She was home, back in her sanctuary where she could finally let go of the day's weight. The quiet comfort of her house surrounded her as she stepped inside, setting her bags down and slipping off her shoes. She poured herself a glass of water in the kitchen, the coolness refreshing as she let herself unwind. The night had brought many lessons, both painful and affirming, but as she stood there, Alana knew that she had stayed true to herself. She had faced hostility with compassion, endured prejudice with grace, and above all, she had saved a life. The journey wasn't over, and the world wasn't perfect, but she knew she would face each new day with the same strength and resolve. The soft morning light filtered through Alana's bedroom window, casting a warm glow across the room as she awoke. Her body ached from the fatigue of the previous day, but she felt a sense of calm that accompanied the exhaustion, a peace she hadn't quite felt on the flight. Last night had been a battle on more than one front, yet now, in the quiet of her home, she felt a renewed strength. The memory of Cody's fragile breaths and Lindsay's tearful apology still lingered, but they seemed a little less raw in the light of day. After making herself a cup of coffee, Alana sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone to catch up on missed emails and messages. There were updates from the hospital about patient cases and meeting reminders, each message grounding her back in the familiar rhythm of her life. Yet, amidst the typical notifications, one message caught her eye. It was from Lindsay again. "Dr. Jameson, Cody's doing much better today. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery. I'm still thinking about our conversation, and I know it's a long journey ahead, but I'm committed to making real changes for Cody and for myself. Thank you, truly. You didn't have to help us, but you did. I hope I can prove that I've learned from this." Alana reread the message, her thoughts drifting back to the moments she'd spent with Cody and Lindsay. The image of Lindsay's tearful, regretful expression was vivid in her mind, and while Alana wasn't quick to grant forgiveness, she knew that sincere growth took time. Real change required more than words. It demanded introspection, patience, and most of all, consistency. Setting her phone aside, Alana sipped her coffee, allowing herself to reflect on the experience. She hadn't asked for gratitude, nor had she sought an apology. Her goal had been to keep Cody safe, to use her skills as a doctor to help where she was needed. The prejudice Lindsay had shown her was painful, but it hadn't defined her actions. For Alana, compassion wasn't a quality that could be shaken by others' biases. It was the core of who she was, the guiding principle she had chosen long ago. And while Lindsay's message didn't erase the hurt she had caused, it did give Alana hope that people could learn, could grow, and perhaps even become allies rather than adversaries. As she continued to scroll through her messages, another notification appeared. A message from Keisha, her friend and colleague who had messaged her the night before. "Hope you're doing okay." Keisha's message read, "Call me when you're free. I'm dying to hear about the flight back." Alana smiled, grateful for Keisha's friendship. Over the years, Keisha had been there through the highs and lows, celebrating Alana's successes and offering support during the difficult times. She understood the unique challenges that came with being a Black woman in the medical field, and she was one of the few people Alana could share her unfiltered experiences with. Alana typed a quick response, "About to call you. You won't believe the night I had." Moments later, her phone rang, and Keisha's familiar voice filled the quiet of the kitchen. "Alana, so tell me everything. What happened?" Alana let out a small laugh, the warmth of Keisha's energy instantly putting her at ease. She recounted the events of the flight, the tense moments with Lindsay, the urgency of Cody's asthma attack, and the quiet but profound conversation that had followed. As she shared each detail, Keisha listened closely, occasionally interjecting with words of encouragement or disbelief. "You handled it all with so much grace, Alana," Keisha said when Alana finished. "Most people wouldn't have had the patience or strength to put aside their own hurt like that. I'm proud of you." "Thank you, Keisha. It wasn't easy," Alana replied, her voice tinged with a mix of pride and weariness. "It's hard to keep being the one who has to rise above, to always be the one who sets the example." Keisha sighed, her tone gentle but firm. "I know, and you shouldn't have to. But the way you handled it, it showed not just your professionalism, but your heart. I hope Lindsay takes this lesson seriously, not just for her but for her son." Alana nodded, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. "That's what I hope too. Change doesn't happen overnight, but if there's a chance for her to raise Cody with a more open mind, then maybe all of this will have been worth it." They continued to talk, discussing the layers of resilience that had come to define their shared experiences in the medical field. Both women knew that their work required a strength that went beyond skill. It was a strength forged by the determination to challenge bias and fight for equal respect in spaces that weren't always welcoming. They had each chosen this path not just for themselves, but for the younger generations who would follow, hoping to make the road a little smoother for those who came after. When they finally ended the call, Alana felt a quiet sense of renewal. Keisha's words had reminded her of the importance of her journey, of the responsibility she carried not just for herself, but for others. She had chosen to pursue this life because she believed in the power of compassion and the impact it could have, even in the face of ignorance. As Alana prepared for her shift, she allowed herself to linger on the memories of the night before. The experiences she'd lived through, the challenges she'd faced, and the resilience she had cultivated, each moment had shaped her, adding to the strength that she carried within. And while the hurt from Lindsay's actions would take time to heal, Alana knew she would rise above it, just as she always had. Stepping outside, she felt the crisp morning air fill her lungs, invigorating her as she headed to the hospital. The city was alive with the hum of early commuters, the distant sounds of traffic blending into the familiar rhythm of Atlanta waking up. Alana moved forward with a sense of purpose, her mind focused not on the prejudices she had faced, but on the patients waiting for her care. At the hospital, her colleagues greeted her warmly, each one absorbed in their own routines and duties. Alana felt a sense of belonging here that extended beyond the challenges of last night. She was part of a team, a network of professionals who trusted her, who valued her expertise, and who knew her beyond the labels others might impose. Here, she was Dr. Alana Jameson, a name respected not for her race but for her skill, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment. As the morning unfolded, she fell back into the familiar rhythm of her work, moving between patient rooms and reviewing cases with the same care she gave every day. She carried with her the lessons of the night before, each one a reminder of the strength she held within and the journey she continued to forge. When she finally took a break, Alana glanced at her phone once more. Lindsay's message was still there, a silent testament to the possibility of change, no matter how uncertain or difficult it might be. Alana didn't respond, knowing that real transformation would require time, reflection, and ultimately, action on Lindsay's part. In the quiet of her break room, Alana allowed herself a moment of peace, a deep breath that carried with it a feeling of quiet triumph. She would continue forward, facing each new day with the same resilience and resolve. The world wasn't perfect, and there would always be battles ahead, but Alana knew she was prepared. She would face each challenge with the same grace and compassion that defined her, lifting herself above the noise and holding firmly to her own path. After finishing her shift at the hospital, Alana walked out into the late afternoon sun, her mind still humming with the events of the previous night. The patients she'd treated that day, the staff she'd worked alongside, all of it had grounded her, reminding her of the world she had built through hard work, resilience, and compassion. As she walked toward her car, the weight of the night before felt lighter, as though she were finally ready to let it rest. The journey had been taxing, yes, but she had come out of it with an even stronger sense of self. When she reached her car, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a message from her mother. "Just thinking of you. Hope you had a good trip back, sweetheart. Love you." The words warmed her heart, and she smiled, grateful for her family's constant support. Her mother had always been her steadfast anchor, a reminder that she was seen and valued for who she was. Alana replied with a quick message, letting her mom know that she was safe and that she'd call her later. She knew her mother would want to hear about the flight and all that had happened, and though it would be a difficult conversation, it was one she wanted to have. Her mother had faced similar challenges in her own life and had taught Alana to stay strong and resilient, to never allow others' prejudices to define her worth. Driving home, Alana found herself thinking not just about her mother's influence, but about the legacy she wanted to leave. She thought of the young women who might look up to her, the young doctors of color who would one day enter the medical field. If she could make their journey just a bit easier, then every challenge she faced would have been worth it. She had chosen this path not just for herself, but for them, for the generations who would follow, hopefully with fewer obstacles and more allies. Arriving home, Alana parked and took a moment to appreciate the quiet of her neighborhood and the comforting familiarity of her front yard. She stepped inside, letting the warmth of her home embrace her. After a long day at the hospital, her house felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could unwind and reflect in peace. She set down her bag, took off her shoes, and headed to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea. As she waited for the water to boil, Alana checked her phone again, glancing over her messages. She saw the last message from Lindsay, the one she hadn't yet responded to. Though she still didn't feel the need to reply, she could sense the sincerity in Lindsay's words. And while she didn't owe Lindsay forgiveness, she hoped Lindsay's journey toward change would be genuine, that she would raise her son to see people for who they were, not for the color of their skin. Alana knew that real growth required more than words. It needed action and a willingness to look beyond one's own comfort. Lindsay's message had been a step, but it was only the beginning. The true transformation would take time, effort, and perhaps even more painful moments of self-reflection. Alana hoped that, for Cody's sake, Lindsay would make that commitment. She poured herself a cup of tea, carrying it over to her favorite armchair by the window. Outside, the evening was settling in, casting a soft glow over the trees and houses in her neighborhood. She felt the quiet peace of the moment, a chance to reflect on how far she had come. The experiences of the previous night were just one chapter in her story, one of many moments that had challenged her, tested her, and ultimately strengthened her resolve. Alana thought of the flight, of Cody's innocent trust, of Emma's supportive presence, and even of the silent, awkward respect she'd noticed in the other passengers' eyes after she'd helped save Cody's life. Each of these moments reaffirmed her belief in compassion, in the power of empathy to bridge divides, even if just for a fleeting moment. As she sipped her tea, she allowed herself a brief smile. She would keep moving forward, lifting herself above the noise of prejudice and ignorance, focusing on the work she loved and the lives she could impact. She had chosen this life not because it was easy, but because it mattered, because every person she helped and every patient she treated was a chance to show the world who she was and what she stood for. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a reminder for a meeting scheduled for the following week, a new diversity initiative she'd agreed to lead at the hospital. Alana had always felt a deep commitment to improving representation and inclusivity in the medical field, knowing how much it meant for young doctors of color to see themselves in positions of influence and respect. She accepted the calendar reminder, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. There was still work to be done, still minds to open and spaces to create for the next generation. As the sky darkened outside, Alana set down her empty cup and felt a calm readiness settle over her. She had faced another battle, and she had come through it with her integrity intact. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she felt prepared to meet them, fortified by the experiences that had shaped her and the lessons she'd carried with her from each one. Tomorrow she would return to the hospital, to her patients, to the work she loved, and with every new day she would continue to build the legacy she wanted to leave, a legacy of resilience, compassion, and unshakable resolve in the face of adversity. Alana knew that, no matter how the world saw her, she would hold firmly to her own path, rising above the prejudice, setting the example, and proving, once again, that her strength was hers alone. As she looked out the window, Alana felt a profound sense of peace. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and she knew that, as long as she stayed true to herself, she would continue to rise above, no matter what lay ahead. Alana's journey on that turbulent flight highlights the courage it takes to rise above prejudice with compassion and professionalism. Her story illustrates not only the power of empathy, but also the strength required to respond to ignorance with grace. Through her actions, she reminded everyone around her, Lindsay, Cody, Emma, and the other passengers, that kindness, integrity, and resilience are far stronger than bias. A pivotal lesson from Alana's experience is that real change begins with small moments of awareness. When people confront their own prejudices, as Lindsay did, they open the door to a better world, not only for themselves, but for future generations. Alana's courage set an example that compassion can bridge divides, even if healing and understanding take time. At its heart, This story is about the power of resilience and the ability to stay true to one's values despite challenges. Alana's strength lies in her unwavering commitment to her identity, her profession, and her humanity, showing us that we can all choose to act with kindness and dignity, regardless of others' judgments. Bookmark. If you found this story moving, please comment with a 1. If you found it deeply inspiring, comment with a 2. And feel free to share any of your own stories about courage, compassion, or resilience in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more inspiring stories that highlight the power of empathy and strength in the face of adversity. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this journey, so be sure to share your reflections in the comments section.